You know the type. That one person who gets a tiny ounce of power and decides to wield it like a hammer. For Meredith Vance, the senior gate agent at Meridian Airways, the podium wasn't just a counter. It was her throne, and she decided who was worthy to pass. But on a freezing Tuesday in Denver, Meredith made a fatal calculation. She looked at a black woman in a hoodie, scoffed at her first-class ticket, and decided to humiliate her for sport. She thought she was crushing a nobody. She didn't know that the woman standing in front of her, Dr. Arlene Boudreau, didn't just buy the ticket. She wrote the federal safety laws that allowed Meredith's plane to fly. This isn't just a story about bad customer service. It's about the most satisfying instant karma in aviation history. The fluorescent lights of Denver International Airport hummed with a frequency that seemed designed to induce migraines. It was 6:45 p.m. on a Tuesday, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, and the terminal was a chaotic sea of rolling luggage, crying toddlers, and exhausted business travelers clutching lukewarm coffees. Outside, a light dusting of snow was beginning to swirl against the floor-to-ceiling glass, threatening delays that had everyone on edge. Dr. Arlene Boudreau stood near the back of the gathering crowd at gate B42, quietly observing the monitor. She didn't look like the most powerful person in the terminal. In fact, she looked like she was ready for a nap. She was wearing a dark maroon oversized hoodie with Howard University faded across the chest, comfortable black yoga pants, and a pair of well-worn sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore zero makeup. The only hint of her status was the matte black Toomey carry-on resting by her side and the platinum wedding band on her finger. Arlene was exhausted. She had just spent 3 days in a windowless conference room in downtown Denver, conducting a grueling audit of mid-air collision avoidance protocols. As a senior external oversight consultant for the FAA and the former deputy director of aviation safety, she spent her life reading the fine print that kept planes from falling out of the sky. Today, she just wanted to get home to D.C., kiss her husband, and sleep for 14 hours. She checked her phone. A text from Marcus, the captain of today's flight. They had worked together years ago during the investigation of a cargo plane incident in Anchorage. Pre-flight checks are green, Arlene. We're looking to push back on time. Saved you a bottle of that sparkling water you like. Arlene smiled, typing back a quick thumbs up. She didn't want to bother him. He had a job to do. She just wanted to board, put on her noise-cancelling headphones, and disappear. At the podium of Gate B42 stood Meredith Vance. Meredith was a fixture at Meridian Airways. With 20 years on the job, she wore her navy blue uniform like armor. Her scarf was tied in a knot so tight it looked like it was restricting blood flow to her brain. She had distinct, rimless glasses that sat halfway down her nose, forcing her to tilt her head back to look at anyone taller than 5'4". Meredith didn't just check tickets, she judged souls. To Meredith, the airport was a battlefield, and passengers were the enemy. She hated the families with strollers. They clog the jet bridge. She hated the businessmen. They think they own the place. But most of all, she hated people who she felt didn't belong in her premium lanes. Ladies and gentlemen, Meredith's voice sliced through the PA system, shrill and overly enunciated. We are beginning boarding for Meridian Flight 590 to Washington Reagan National. We are inviting our concierge key members and first-class passengers to board at this time. Zone 1 only. If you are not Zone 1, do not approach the carpet. I repeat, do not approach the carpet. She said the carpet, with a reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Arlene sighed, picked up her bag, and moved toward the lane marked Priority. She moved with an easy, slow gait, unbothered by the rush. Ahead of her, A man in a sharp grey suit breezed past Meredith. "Welcome back, Mr. Henderson," Meredith cooed, scanning his phone without looking at the screen. She gave him a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Seat 2A. Enjoy your flight." "Thanks, Meredith," the man grunted, not breaking stride. Arlene stepped up next. She held out her phone, the QR code bright on the screen. Meredith didn't look at the phone. She looked at the hoodie. Then she looked at the yoga pants. Then she looked at Arlene's face. Her eyes narrowed behind the rimless lenses. She didn't reach for the scanner. Instead, she crossed her arms over her chest, resting her hands on the podium. "Ma'am," Meredith said, her voice dropping an octave to a tone of patronizing correction. "Zone 5 boarding will be in about 20 minutes. You need to step back." Arlene blinked. She was used to this. It happened often enough that she had a mental script for it, but she was too tired for the dance today. "I'm in Zone 1, Arlene said softly, holding the phone closer. "Seat 1C. Meredith let out a short, sharp exhale through her nose. A scoff. "Ma'am, Zone 1 is for first-class passengers, people who have paid the full fare or have significant status with the airline. General boarding is that way." She pointed a manicured finger toward the chaotic mass of economy passengers. "I understand how the zones work," Arlene said, her voice remaining level. "If you scan the ticket, you'll see—" "I don't need to scan the ticket to know you're in the wrong line," Meredith interrupted, her voice getting louder. Heads in the nearby seats began to turn. "We have a lot of people trying to cut the line today because of the weather delays. I need you to respect the customers who actually paid for this service." The insult hung in the air, gross and heavy. Actually paid. Arlene felt a familiar heat rise in her chest. The Howard University fire, her grandmother used to call it, but she tamped it down. She was a professional. She dealt with hostile Senate subcommittees. She could handle a gate agent with a complex. "My name is Dr. Boudreau," Arlene said, tightening her grip on her phone. "I am flying first class. Please scan the boarding pass." Meredith stared at her. It was a power play. If she scanned it and was wrong, she'd lose face in front of the line of businessmen forming behind Arlene. If she stood her ground, she maintained control. Meredith Vance never lost control. "I'm not going to ask you again," Meredith snapped. "Step out of the line. You are blocking priority passengers." Behind Arlene, a tall man with a briefcase cleared his throat. "Come on, let's go. Some of us have meetings." Arlene turned slightly to look at the man, then turned back to Meredith. She placed her phone directly on the scanner herself. Beep! The little light turned green. The screen flashed. 1C, Boudreau, Arlene, priority access. The silence that followed was deafening. The green light pulsed on the scanner, a silent testament to Arlene's right to be there. A normal person, upon seeing the green light, would apologize. They would say, "Oh, my mistake, doctor. Have a nice flight." But Meredith Vance was not a normal person. She was a woman who viewed an apology as a sign of weakness. She stared at the green light, her face flushing a blotchy red. She felt the eyes of the passengers behind Arlene, the businessmen, the frequent flyers, burning into her. She had made a judgment call based on appearance, and the machine had proved her wrong. Instead of retreating, Meredith dug the trenches deeper. She reached out and hit a button on her console, cancelling the scan. The light turned red. "Computer error," Meredith announced loudly, looking over Arlene's shoulder to the people behind her. "System glitch. It happens when people try to manipulate the upgrades." Arlene's jaw dropped slightly. "Excuse me? I didn't manipulate anything. That is a valid ticket purchased by the federal government." That was the wrong thing to say. To Meredith, government meant freeloader. "Oh, so you're a non-rev?" Meredith's eyes lit up with malicious glee. Non-revenue passenger, staff travel, or some government voucher? She typed furiously on her keyboard. I knew it. You're not a revenue passenger. Listen to me closely. First class is overbooked. We have paying customers, global services members, who need those seats. Since you're on a government voucher and clearly not dressed for the front of the cabin, I'm bumping you to economy. You can't do that, Arlene said, her voice hardening. This isn't a standby ticket. It's a confirmed, full-fare first-class seat, booked through the DOT travel portal. You cannot involuntarily downgrade me based on my attire. I can do whatever I need to do to ensure the safety and comfort of this flight, Meredith hissed, leaning over the podium. And frankly, your behavior is becoming aggressive. The magic word. Aggressive. Arlene stood completely still. She knew this trap. If she raised her voice, she was the angry black woman. If she pointed a finger, she was a security threat. Meredith was baiting her, trying to manufacture a reason to deny her boarding that would stick on a report. I am not being aggressive, Arlene said, her voice icy and precise. I am stating the terms of the contract of carriage. I have a confirmed seat. I have valid ID. I have cleared security. You have no grounds to deny me boarding. I decide who boards, Meredith shouted. The terminal had gone quiet. People were pulling out phones. A young man in the queue, a college student with a backpack, held his phone up, recording the interaction. Meredith didn't notice. She was too focused on crushing Arlene. Jason, Meredith barked. A younger gate agent, Jason Sterling, hurried over from the jet bridge door. He looked terrifyingly young, maybe 22, with an ill-fitting uniform and a look of perpetual panic. Yes, Meredith. This passenger is refusing to follow crew member instructions and is causing a disturbance. Retrieve her checked bag tags if she has any. She's not flying. Jason looked at Arlene. He saw a calm woman standing still. He looked at Meredith, who was practically vibrating with rage. Meredith, are you sure? The screen says she's— Don't look at the screen! Look at me! Meredith snapped at the boy. She is disrupting the gate area. We are closing the flight to her. She turned back to Arlene, a smug smile curling her thin lips. There. Now you're not flying at all. You can take it up with customer service at the main counter. Get out of my line. Arlene looked at Meredith. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She slowly reached into her purse. Don't you dare reach for a weapon, Meredith shrieked, stepping back theatrically. It's a badge, Arlene said. She pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open. The gold emblem of the Department of Transportation gleamed under the fluorescent lights, along with a holographic ID card that identified her clearance level. It was a higher clearance than the TSA supervisors at this airport. I don't care if you're the Tooth Fairy, Meredith scoffed, not even looking at the credentials. You are off this flight. Jason, call security. Have her escorted out. Arlene closed the wallet. She looked at Jason. Son, do not call security. If you call security, this becomes a federal incident. You don't want that paperwork. Jason froze, his hand hovering over the phone. He looked at Arlene's eyes. They were terrifyingly calm. Call them, Meredith screamed. She's impersonating an officer now. That's a felony. Arlene took a deep breath. She pulled out her phone again and dialed a number. She didn't dial customer service. She didn't dial her husband. She dialed the direct line to the Meridian Airways station manager for Denver, a man named Robert Cole. She knew him because she had audited his operations 6 months ago. Meredith, Arlene said, holding the phone to her ear, I'm going to give you one chance to walk this back. Scan the boarding pass, let me get on the plane, and we can discuss a remedial training course for you later. If you make me make this call, You are going to regret the next hour of your life." Meredith laughed. It was a harsh, cackling sound. "You think you can scare me with a fake phone call? I've been here 20 years. I run this gate. Nobody goes over my head." She reached out and snatched the boarding pass from Arlene's hand, a paper copy Arlene had printed just in case, and ripped it in half. "Boarding denied," Meredith declared. "Next in line." Arlene watched the paper flutter to the dirty blue carpet. "Okay," Arlene whispered into the phone. "Bob, it's Arlene Boudreau. Yes, I'm at gate B42. You have a rogue agent who just destroyed a federal inspector's ticket and denied boarding on a mandatory compliance check flight. Yes, I'll wait." The atmosphere at gate B42 had shifted from annoyance to spectacle. The line of first-class passengers had stalled. The man in the grey suit who had been impatient earlier was now looking at Meredith with open hostility. "She just ripped up her ticket," the man muttered to someone behind him. "That's crazy." Meredith was running on pure adrenaline. She ignored Arlene, who had stepped a few feet to the side and was waiting calmly, phone pressed to her ear. Meredith began frantically scanning the next passengers, trying to normalize the situation through speed. "Welcome, seat 3B. Welcome, seat 4A. Hurry up, please. We're behind schedule." She refused to look at Arlene. In Meredith's mind, the security guards would arrive any second, drag this woman away, and Meredith would write a report about a disruptive passenger who threatened staff. The union would back her. They always did. But security didn't come. Instead, the jet bridge door opened. Captain Marcus Thorne stepped out. He was a mountain of a man, an ex-Air Force pilot with salt and pepper hair, and the kind of authority that didn't need to shout. He was putting his cap on, looking for the gate agent to ask why the passenger count wasn't updating. "Meredith," Captain Thorne said, his voice deep and rumbling. "Why are we stalled? We have a slot time to hit." Meredith spun around, putting on her professional victim face. "Captain, thank God. We have a security situation. This woman refused to leave the gate area after being denied boarding for aggression." She pointed a shaking finger at Arlene. Captain Thorne looked where she was pointing. He squinted. Then his eyes went wide. "Arlene?" Arlene lowered her phone. "Hello, Marcus. I'd love to come aboard, but apparently I'm a security threat." Meredith's brain stuttered. "You know her?" Captain Thorne walked right past Meredith, stepping over the velvet rope. He walked up to Arlene and extended a hand, which she shook warmly. "Meredith," Thorne said, turning his head slowly to look at the gate agent. "Do you know who this is?" "She's a disruptive passenger," Meredith insisted, though her voice wavered. "She's on a non-rev voucher and refused to follow dress code policy for upgrades." "Dress code?" Thorne looked at Arlene's hoodie. Then he laughed. "Meredith, Dr. Boudreau isn't non-rev. She's must-ride. She's here for the FAA oversight on the new avionics suite we're testing. If she doesn't fly, the plane doesn't fly. We are legally grounded without her sign-off." The color drained from Meredith's face so fast it looked like a curtain falling. "FAA? Former deputy director," Arlene corrected gently. "Current lead consultant, and Meredith here just ripped up my boarding pass." Thorne looked at the torn paper on the floor. His face darkened. He looked at Jason, the young agent. "Jason, print Dr. Boudreau a new boarding pass. Immediately." "I can't," Jason stammered. "Meredith locked her out of the flight in the system. It says security denied. Only a station manager can override it." "Well then," Arlene said, looking toward the concourse hallway. "It's a good thing Robert is sprinting." Down the moving walkway, a man in a suit was running. Not walking, running. Robert Cole, the station manager, looked like he was about to have a heart attack. He was clutching a walkie-talkie, his tie flapping over his shoulder. Meredith saw her boss running. In 20 years, she had never seen Robert Cole run. He was a man who delegated everything. If he was running, the building was either on fire or the CEO was here. Robert skid to a halt at the podium, breathless. "Dr. Boudreau," he wheezed, ignoring Meredith entirely. "I am so sorry. I got the alert. I came as fast as I could." "It's fine, Bob," Arlene said. "But we have a problem. Your agent has flagged me as a security threat and destroyed my ticket, and she did it in front of—" She gestured to the crowd, where at least 10 phones were recording. An audience. Robert turned to Meredith. His face was purple. "Meredith, what did you do?" Meredith was cornered, but her ego wouldn't let her die with dignity. She tried to pivot. "Bob, she was rude. She was dressed like a thug. I have discretion to enforce the dress code for first class. You sent the memo last week about maintaining standards." "The memo," Robert said through gritted teeth, "applied to staff travel, Meredith, not revenue passengers, and certainly not federal oversight officials." "I didn't know she was federal. She didn't show ID until later." "I tried to scan my ticket," Arlene interjected calmly. "You refused. You judged me based on my hoodie, and when the machine proved you wrong, you cancelled the transaction. That is a violation of Code 14, CFR Part 382, regarding non-discrimination, and likely a violation of your own internal carriage contract." "She's lying!" Meredith shrieked. "She threatened me." "I have it on video," a voice called out from the line. It was the college student. "I recorded the whole thing. She didn't do anything. The lady in the uniform was tripping." "Me too," the businessman in the grey suit added. "This agent has been rude to everyone. She needs to go." Robert Cole closed his eyes for a second. He knew this was a disaster. He typed his override code into the terminal. The keys clacked loudly in the silence. "Jason," Robert said quietly, "print the pass." Jason printed it. He handed it to Robert, who handed it to Arlene with 2 hands, like an offering. "Dr. Boudreau, please. Board. We will hold the door for you. I will handle this." Arlene took the ticket. She looked at Meredith. Meredith was trembling, her hands gripping the podium so hard her knuckles were white. She looked small now. The power was gone. "Thank you, Bob," Arlene said. "But I don't think we're done. I'm going to need the FAA incident report forms, and I'm going to need Meredith's cider badge number for the complaint." "You can't have my badge number," Meredith spat. "Actually," Arlene said, stepping closer, her voice dropping so only Meredith and Robert could hear. "I can. And since you decided to make this about security, I'm formally invoking my authority to inspect the gate operations. I want to see the training logs for this station, specifically your diversity and de-escalation training logs." "Now?" Robert asked, sweating. "No," Arlene said. "I have a flight to catch, but have them ready when I land. And Bob? I don't want her working this gate when I get back." Arlene turned and walked onto the jet bridge. Captain Thorne tipped his cap to her and followed. The crowd in the terminal actually applauded. Meredith stood there, stripped of her power. But the twist was, she still didn't think she was wrong. She thought she was the victim, and that delusion was about to lead her to make one final, catastrophic mistake. As the door to the jet bridge closed, Meredith grabbed the PA microphone. She wasn't going to let Arlene get the last word. She was going to follow her onto the plane. The jet bridge is a transitional space, a limbo between the chaos of the terminal and the ordered sanctuary of the aircraft. For Meredith Vance, however, it was a tunnel of humiliation. As the heavy steel door clicked shut behind Arlene, Meredith stood at her podium, her chest heaving. The applause from the passengers in the terminal was like physical blows. She saw the smirks on the faces of the businessmen. She saw Jason, the junior agent, looking at the floor, trying to hide a smile. She saw Robert Cole, her manager, frantically typing on his BlackBerry, likely emailing corporate to get ahead of the disaster she had just caused. But in Meredith's mind, the disaster wasn't her fault. It was Arlene's. She set me up, Meredith thought, her logic spiraling into paranoia. She came here looking like that on purpose. She wanted to embarrass me. She thinks she can just flash a badge and break my rules. To Meredith, the airport was her house. You didn't walk into her house, insult her furniture, and then go sit in the best chair without consequences. The fact that Arlene was now sitting in first class, sipping water and probably laughing at her, was an itch Meredith couldn't scratch. "Robert," Meredith said, her voice trembling with a dangerous mix of rage and desperation. "You didn't verify her luggage." Robert looked up, exasperated. "Meredith, stop! Go to the break room. We will discuss your suspension in 10 minutes. "Suspension?" The word hit her like a slap. "I'm protecting this airline. You didn't check her bag. She flashed a badge. But how do we know it's real? You just let a security risk onto the plane because you're afraid of a lawsuit." "I'm afraid of the FAA!" Robert shouted, losing his cool. "She is the FAA. Go to the break room. That is a direct order." Meredith didn't move toward the break room. She looked at the closed door of the jet bridge. "If I find something," she reasoned. "If I go on there and find her being aggressive, or find that her bag is oversized, or prove she's a fraud, they'll have to thank me. I'll be the hero." It was the logic of a drowning person grabbing at a shark for safety. "I need to check the manifest," Meredith mumbled. She sidestepped Robert, who was distracted by a call coming in from the VP of Operations. Before Jason could block her, Meredith lunged. She swiped her badge on the reader. The door clicked open, and she bolted into the jet bridge. "Meredith, no!" Robert screamed, dropping his phone. But she was already gone. Her heels clicked aggressively against the metal slats of the bridge floor. The cold air of the tarmac seeped through the canvas walls, but she was burning up. She marched down the incline, fueled by 20 years of bitterness. On board Flight 590, the mood was calm. The soft jazz boarding music was playing. Arlene Boudreau had settled into seat 1C. She had placed her bag in the overhead bin, taken off her hoodie to reveal a simple black t-shirt underneath, and was closing her eyes, trying to lower her cortisol levels. Captain Thorne was in the cockpit, running the pre-flight checklist. The lead flight attendant, a veteran named Nancy, who had flown with Meredith for years and despised her, was in the galley prepping drinks. Arlene heard the commotion before she saw it. Heavy footsteps, heavy breathing. Meredith burst onto the plane. Nancy looked up from the ice bin, startled. "Meredith? What are you doing? We're about to push." Meredith ignored her. She scanned the cabin like a predator until her eyes locked on seat 1C. Arlene opened her eyes. She didn't look surprised. She looked disappointed. "Meredith," Arlene said calmly, "you are making a very bad decision." "You don't belong here," Meredith said, her voice loud in the confined space of the cabin. The other first-class passengers stopped what they were doing. "I need to see your bag. I need to measure it. And I need to see that ID again. I think it's a forgery." "Get off the plane, Meredith," Nancy warned, stepping out of the galley. "You are not crew. You have no jurisdiction here." "I am the senior gate agent," Meredith shouted, pointing a finger at Arlene. "And I have the authority to remove passengers who are non-compliant. She is non-compliant." Arlene didn't move. She stayed seated, her seatbelt already fastened. "I am compliant. I am seated. I have a ticket. And you are currently trespassing on a federal aircraft." "Don't quote the law to me," Meredith snapped. She lunged forward, reaching for the overhead bin above Arlene. "I'm taking your bag off. If the bag goes, you go." "Do not touch my property," Arlene said, her voice dropping to that terrifyingly low register again. "My bag contains classified federal documents related to the audit. If you remove it, you are interfering with a federal investigation." "I don't care," Meredith screamed. She grabbed the handle of the Toomey bag. Nancy, the flight attendant, tried to intervene, grabbing Meredith's arm. "Meredith, stop! You're assaulting a passenger!" Meredith shoved Nancy. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was enough to knock the flight attendant back against the galley wall. A gasp went through the cabin. That was the line. You can be rude, you can be wrong, but you never, ever touch the flight crew. "That's it," Arlene said. She wasn't speaking to Meredith. She was speaking to the cabin at large. From row 3, directly behind Arlene, 2 men stood up in unison. They were dressed in nondescript polo shirts and khakis. They looked like boring middle management types. They had been reading magazines, but the way they moved wasn't boring. It was tactical. "Federal agents!" the man in 3A shouted, his voice booming with command authority. "Step away from the passenger. Hands where we can see them." Meredith froze, her hand still on Arlene's bag. She looked at the men. She blinked. "What?" "I said step back." The man in 3B was already moving into the aisle, blocking Meredith's path to the exit. He pulled a badge from his belt, a badge much larger and heavier than Arlene's. Federal Air Marshal. Meredith's brain couldn't compute it. "No, you don't understand. I'm the gate agent. She's the problem. I'm getting her off." "You just assaulted a flight crew member and attempted to seize federal property," the marshal barked. "Get on your knees now." "I can't get on my knees. I'm in a skirt," Meredith stammered, the reality of the situation finally piercing her delusion. "Get down!" The marshal didn't wait. He grabbed Meredith by the shoulder and the wrist, spinning her around with practiced efficiency. He forced her down into the aisle of the first-class cabin. "You're hurting me!" Meredith shrieked. "Nancy, tell them who I am!" Nancy stood up, straightening her uniform. She looked down at Meredith, her face stone cold. "I know who you are, Meredith. You're the woman who just assaulted me." The cockpit door flew open. Captain Marcus Thorne stepped out, his face a mask of thunder. He saw his lead flight attendant rubbing her shoulder. He saw 2 federal air marshals pinning his gate agent to the floor of his aircraft. He saw Dr. Arlene Boudreau watching the scene with the detached interest of a scientist observing a lab rat. "Report," Thorne barked. "Subject breached the aircraft," the lead marshal stated, holding Meredith's wrists firmly behind her back. "Interfered with flight crew, assaulted a flight attendant, attempted to seize property of a federal inspector. We have detained her under 49 U.S. Code 465044. Meredith was sobbing now, her face pressed against the blue industrial carpet of the aisle. "Captain Thorne, Marcus, please, they're crazy. I was just doing my job." Thorne looked down at her. There was no pity in his eyes, only the cold calculation of a pilot who realizes his schedule is ruined. "Your job, Meredith, stays at the podium. Once you cross that threshold without my permission, you are a passenger. And right now, you are a hijacker." "Hijacker?" Meredith wailed. "I've worked here 20 years." "And that was your last day," Thorne said. He keyed his radio. "Tower, this is Meridian 590. We have a security incident on board. Requesting airport police and FBI to the gate immediately. We have a detained subject." The wait for the police was agonizingly long for Meredith, and deliciously short for everyone else. The passengers in economy were craning their necks, trying to see what was happening. The first-class passengers were filming everything. Meredith lay on the floor, the fight draining out of her. She looked up and saw Arlene. Arlene leaned over slightly. "I tried to tell you, Meredith. I gave you an out. I called your boss. I showed you my credentials. But you had to have the power. You had to be the gatekeeper." "Go to hell," Meredith whispered, though it lacked her usual venom. "I'm going to DC, Arlene corrected. "You, however, are going to federal booking." 4 minutes later, 3 uniformed Denver police officers and 2 men in suits, FBI, boarded the plane. The air marshals stood up, handing custody over. "Meredith Vance?" the FBI agent asked. "Yes," she sniffled. "You are under arrest for interference with flight crew members and attendants. You have the right to remain silent." They pulled her up. Her uniform was rumpled. Her scarf was crooked. Her glasses were hanging from one ear. The handcuffs clicked, a sharp metallic finality that silenced the entire plane. As they marched her off the aircraft, she had to walk past every single passenger in first class. The man in the grey suit, the one she had fawned over earlier, looked her in the eye and shook his head. "Pathetic," he muttered. She was led out onto the jet bridge, past a pale and shaking Jason, past a devastated Robert Cole who refused to make eye contact, and into the terminal. The terminal had not emptied. In fact, it had filled up. Word had spread that the crazy lady had stormed the plane. As Meredith was led out in cuffs, flanked by the FBI, a sea of smartphones rose to meet her. It was the modern-day equivalent of the stocks. She couldn't hide. Her face, twisted in a mixture of crying and anger, was live-streamed to thousands of people instantly. Back on the plane, silence returned. Captain Thorne picked up the PA microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. I want to apologize for the disturbance. The situation has been resolved. The individual has been removed and is in federal custody. We will be pushing back in 5 minutes. And I'd like to offer a free round of drinks to everyone on board today to thank you for your patience." A cheer went up from the back of the plane. Arlene didn't cheer. She just pulled her phone out. She had one text message to send. It was to the administrator of the FAA. Audit status update. Meridian Airways Denver station requires immediate intervention. Serious safety culture violations observed. Personnel arrested. Full report to follow. I'm coming home. She put the phone away, accepted a glass of sparkling water from Nancy, and finally closed her eyes. But the story wasn't over. Meredith Vance had been removed from the airport, but the karma was just warming up. The internet works faster than a jet engine, and while Meredith sat in the back of a squad car, her life was being dismantled, bit by digital bit. By the time Flight 590 reached cruising altitude over Kansas, Meredith Vance was trending on Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit. The hashtag GateAgentCorin was the #1 trending topic in the United States. The video recorded by the college student had been viewed 4.5 million times in 2 hours. It was a masterpiece of cinema verite. It showed everything: the sneer, the "don't approach the carpet" comment, the refusal to scan the ticket, the destruction of the boarding pass, and the arrival of Captain Thorne. But the second video, the one from inside the plane, filmed by the businessman in 2A, was the kill shot. It showed Meredith shoving Nancy. It showed the air marshals taking her down. It showed the handcuffs. The internet does not do nuance. It does destruction. In a holding cell at the Denver precinct, Meredith sat on a metal bench. She had been processed, fingerprinted, and stripped of her shoelaces. She was allowed one phone call. She didn't call a lawyer. She couldn't afford a good one. She called the union rep, a man named Jerry, who had saved her job 3 times before when she had been the subject of complaints. "Jerry," Meredith cried into the receiver, "you have to get down here. They arrested me. It was a setup. The passenger provoked me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Meredith," Jerry's voice was tired, "I've seen the video." "The video is edited. It's out of context." There are 6 angles, Meredith. I saw you shove Nancy. I saw you try to steal a federal inspector's bag. I saw you rip up the ticket. I was protecting the gate. No, Jerry said, and his voice was cold. You were on a power trip. Listen to me closely. The union is not touching this. We defend members against unjust termination. We do not defend members who commit federal felonies on camera. You are on your own. Jerry, you can't leave me. You're already fired, Meredith. Meridian sent the notice 10 minutes ago. Effective immediately. Gross misconduct. Loss of security clearance. You're done. The line went dead. Meredith stared at the receiver. For the first time in 20 years, she had no badge, no podium, no carpet to guard. She was just a woman in a holding cell facing up to 20 years in prison for interfering with a flight crew. Meanwhile, at 35,000 feet, Arlene was connected to the plane's Wi-Fi. She wasn't looking at the memes, though the one of Meredith's face, superimposed on the Wicked Witch of the West, was creative. She was looking at her email. Her inbox was flooding. The first email was from the CEO of Meridian Airways. Subject: Urgent apology, action plan. Dear Dr. Boudreau, I am writing to express my profound horror at the events in Denver. There are no excuses. We are cooperating fully with the FBI. Mr. Cole, the station manager, has been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into why he allowed an agent with prior complaints to remain in a customer-facing role. We would like to offer a settlement for the distress caused and a donation to a charity of your choice. Arlene didn't reply. She forwarded the email to the FAA legal counsel with a note. Add this to the file. Do not settle. We are going for a consent order. Arlene wasn't interested in money. She was interested in change. She knew Meredith wasn't an anomaly. She was a symptom of a culture that allowed unchecked authority to fester without oversight. Arlene stood up and walked to the galley. Nancy was there, icing her shoulder. How is it? Arlene asked softly. It'll bruise, Nancy said with a tired smile. But honestly, it was worth it to see her finally face consequences. She's been terrorizing us for years, reporting us for uniforms, for hair, for smiling too much. She wrote me up last year because my shoes were too scuffed. She won't be writing anyone up ever again, Arlene said. I'm sorry you got caught in the middle. Can I ask you something? Nancy asked. Who are you, really? I mean, I know you're FAA, but the way the captain looked at you? Arlene smiled. Before I was an auditor, I was an accident investigator. I was the lead on the Flight 802 crash in the Everglades. I spent 3 months in a swamp picking up pieces of a plane that went down because a mechanic cut corners and a supervisor didn't check his work. Arlene looked out the porthole window at the clouds. I promised myself then that I would never let the small stuff slide. Because the small stuff is what kills people. Meredith thought she was just being mean. But a gate agent who ignores rules, who judges by appearance, who loses emotional control, that's a safety risk. If she's that unstable over a hoodie, what does she do when there's a real bomb threat? Does she freeze? Does she panic? Nancy nodded, understanding. She's a weak link. Exactly, Arlene said. And in aviation, weak links break. The plane began its descent into Reagan National. The lights of D.C. twinkled below. The Washington Monument, the Capitol Dome. It was Arlene's turf. As the wheels touched down, Meredith Vance was being arraigned. The judge set bail at $50,000. She didn't have it. She would spend the night in jail. But the real punishment was waiting for her outside. When Meredith was finally released on bond the next morning, she walked out of the police station trying to cover her face. It didn't work. Paparazzi were there. Not because she was a celebrity, but because she was the villain of the week. Meredith. Why did you attack the black woman? Meredith, do you hate the FAA? Meredith, are you racist? She scrambled into a cab, hiding her face. She went home to her small apartment. She turned on the TV. CNN was running a segment. The headline read, "Flying while black. FAA official humiliated. Agent arrested." And then the anchor said something that made Meredith's blood run cold. Sources say that the Department of Transportation is launching a nationwide audit of Meridian Airways' hiring and training practices, triggered by this incident. This could cost the airline millions in fines. Furthermore, investigators are looking into Meredith Vance's past. Several former passengers have come forward alleging similar treatment. Meredith sank onto her couch. It wasn't just one incident anymore. The floodgates had opened. Every person she had ever sneered at, every family she had split up, every business traveler she had talked down to. They were all remembering her. They were all posting their stories. She had wanted to be the gatekeeper. She had wanted to be the one who decided who got in and who stayed out. Now, she was locked out of everything. The airline industry has a blacklist. Her name was now at the top of it. She would never work at an airport again. She wouldn't even be able to work at a bus station. Arlene Boudreau, meanwhile, was sitting in her office at FAA headquarters. She looked at the stack of files on her desk. The Meridian Airways audit. She picked up her red pen. "Let's get to work," she whispered. 6 months later, the snow had melted in Denver, but the freeze on Meredith Vance's life was permanent. The federal courthouse in downtown Denver was a somber building of gray stone and heavy oak doors, a far cry from the bright, frantic energy of the airport terminal Meredith used to rule. She sat at the defendant's table, wearing a cheap suit she had bought at a thrift store. Her lawyer, a court-appointed public defender named Mr. Higgins, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. The courtroom was packed. The incident on Flight 590 had not just gone viral. It had become a case study. Law students were there. Aviation bloggers were there. And in the back row, sitting quietly with a notebook, was Dr. Arlene Boudreau. Meredith had aged 10 years in 6 months. Her hair, once dyed a sharp, aggressive blonde, was now showing grey roots. Her posture was slumped. She wasn't the lioness of Gate B42 anymore. She was a statistic. "The defendant will rise," Judge Elena Cortez commanded. Meredith stood up on shaky legs. "Meredith Vance," the judge began, peering over her glasses. "You have been found guilty of 1 count of interference with flight crew members and attendants, a felony under Title 49 of the United States Code. You have also been found guilty of simple assault." Meredith trembled. She had spent the last 6 months convincing herself she would get probation. She had told her neighbors she was a victim of cancel culture. She still believed deep down that she was the only one who cared about the rules. "Ms. Vance," Judge Cortez continued, her voice echoing in the silence, "I have read the pre-sentencing report. I have watched the videos. What strikes me most is not just the violence of your actions, but the arrogance that preceded them. You took a position of service and turned it into a weapon of discrimination and control. You profiled a woman based on her clothing and her race, and when she proved you wrong, you doubled down to the point of endangering an entire aircraft." "I was just," Meredith squeaked. "You were not just doing anything," the judge cut her off sharply. "You were acting as a tyrant in a vest. The aviation system relies on trust. Passengers trust the crew. The crew trusts the ground staff. You shattered that trust." The judge looked down at the papers. "It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 18 months in a federal correctional facility. Meredith gasped. A wail escaped her throat. Prison. For checking a bag. For assaulting a flight attendant and hijacking the authority of a federal marshal, the judge corrected. Following your release, you will serve 3 years of supervised probation. Furthermore, the judge paused, looking Meredith dead in the eye. This was the part that would hurt more than the cage. The FAA has petitioned, and I have granted, a lifetime ban on your employment in any capacity within the aviation industry. Additionally, you are hereby placed on the federal no-fly list for a period of 10 years. You are grounded, Miss Vance. The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. Grounded. For Meredith, who defined her existence by her proximity to the jet set, who lived for the rush of the airport, this was a death sentence. She would never step foot in a terminal again. She would never see Paris or London or even a connecting flight to Phoenix. She was stuck on the earth, while the people she used to judge flew over her head. As the bailiffs moved to cuff her, real handcuffs this time, leading to a transport van, not a holding cell, Meredith looked back. She saw Arlene. Arlene didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply nodded, a gesture of finality, and closed her notebook. The legacy of Gate B-42. While Meredith sat in a cell at the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California, the world outside was changing because of her mistake. Dr. Arlene Boudreau did not just go back to work. She went to war on the culture of the airline industry. Using the Denver incident as the catalyst, she spearheaded a new FAA directive known colloquially as the Boudreau Protocol. It was a sweeping set of regulations that mandated 1. De-escalation training. Every gate agent in the country had to undergo 40 hours of mandatory conflict resolution and bias training. 2. The Verify First rule. Agents were strictly prohibited from denying boarding based on subjective assessments of attire unless explicit indecency laws were violated, and they were forbidden from refusing to scan a valid ticket to prove a point. 3. Oversight. A new hotline was established for passengers to report abuse of power by ground staff directly to the DOT, bypassing the airline's internal and often ignored complaint departments. Meridian Airways, desperate to save their reputation, settled the federal investigation for a record $12 million fine. They fired the station manager, Robert Cole, for failure to supervise. They also launched a scholarship fund in Arlene's name for minority women entering aviation engineering. Arlene didn't take a dime of personal settlement money. She donated her potential damages to a legal defense fund for wrongfully bumped passengers. She had turned a moment of humiliation into a movement for dignity. 3 years later, the food court at the Aurora shopping mall on the outskirts of Denver was a depressing place. It smelled of stale fryer grease and floor cleaner. Meredith Vance was released on good behavior after serving 14 months. She was now on probation. She had lost her condo. With no income and a felony record, the bank had foreclosed while she was inside. She lived in a small rented room in a basement that smelled of mold. She couldn't get a job in an office. Background checks flagged her immediately. She was the crazy plane lady. Her face was still a meme. So, she landed the only job that didn't check too closely, clearing trays at Taco Fiesta in the mall food court. It was a Tuesday afternoon, much like the one where she had ruined her life. Meredith was wiping down a sticky table, wearing a bright orange visor that she hated. Her uniform was stained with salsa. Her feet hurt. She looked up at the wall where a large TV was playing the news. The volume was low, but the chyron was clear. Breaking news. President appoints new FAA administrator. The camera cut to a press conference in the Rose Garden of the White House. Standing at the podium, looking regal in a sharp navy suit, was Dr. Arlene Boudreau. She was smiling, her hand resting on a Bible, as she took the oath of office to become the highest-ranking aviation official in the United States. Meredith froze, the rag dripping dirty water onto her shoes. On the screen, a reporter asked Arlene a question. "Madam Administrator, what is your primary goal for your tenure?" Arlene leaned into the microphone. Her voice was crisp, clear, and kind. "To ensure that the skies belong to everyone. To ensure that safety and dignity are the rights of every passenger, regardless of who they are or what they are wearing. No one should ever feel small when they are trying to fly high." Meredith felt a tear slide down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of repentance. It was a tear of pure, distilled regret. A teenager bumped into her, spilling a soda on the floor. "Hey, watch it, lady," the kid snapped. "Clean that up." Meredith opened her mouth to snap back. She wanted to scream, "Do you know who I am? I used to control who got on the plane to Tokyo." But she caught her reflection in the glass of the taco stand. She saw the orange visor. She saw the grey hair. She saw the felon. She swallowed her pride. It tasted like ash. "Yes, sir," Meredith whispered. "I'll get the mop." She turned away from the TV, away from the sky, and looked down at the dirty floor. She had tried to be the gatekeeper of the clouds, and now she was the janitor of the earth. The karma hadn't just hit her, it had buried her. And high above them all, at 30,000 feet, a Meridian Airways jet streaked across the blue Colorado sky, carrying hundreds of people to their destinations, safe, respected, and free. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of how Meredith Vance tried to check the wrong passenger and ended up checking herself into federal prison. It's a brutal lesson, but a necessary one. The airport isn't a place for power trips. It's a place for transit. Meredith forgot the golden rule of customer service and of life. You never know who you are talking to. You don't know their story, you don't know their struggle, and you certainly don't know if they wrote the federal laws you're pretending to enforce. Dr. Arlene Boudreau didn't just win. She changed the game. She proved that true power doesn't need to scream or belittle. True power is calm. True power is competent. And true power wins in the end. What do you think? Did Meredith deserve the prison time, or was the lifetime ban from flying the real punishment? And have you ever dealt with a gate agent on a power trip? Let me know your horror stories in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice served, please do me a favor. Smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story about people getting exactly what they deserve. Until next time, stay humble, fly safe, and remember, don't block the gate.